Hi everybody. Welcome to our channel, The Scary Tales. Our scary and horror stories are designed to send chills down your spine. Enjoy the spine-tingling stories thrill. Here's your horror stories. 1. The reflection that wasn't mine. Lena had always hated the old mirror in her grandmother's attic. Its frame was rusted, its surface slightly warped. One stormy night, she ventured upstairs to put away some boxes when lightning illuminated the room. Her reflection was staring at her, but it wasn't mimicking her movements. She stepped closer. The figure in the glass grinned while she remained still. Heart pounding, she backed away, but her reflection didn't move. Instead, it raised a trembling hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside. Lena turned to flee, but something cold wrapped around her wrist. She shrieked as she was yanked forward, her body colliding with the mirror's surface. The glass swallowed her whole. The next morning, her grandmother found the attic empty except for the mirror. Lena's reflection was in it, pounding and screaming, but no sound ever escaped. 2. The men who watched from the dark. Mark lived alone in his apartment. Lately, he had an unsettling feeling that someone was watching him at night. It wasn't paranoia, he could feel eyes on him. One evening, he turned off all the lights and sat in his living room, staring out into the darkness. He wanted to prove to himself that nothing was there. That's when he saw it. A pair of glowing eyes peered at him from the hallway. His breath caught in his throat. His apartment was locked. No one else was inside. Slowly, the eyes moved closer. A figure emerged from the shadows, a twisted, grinning thing with elongated limbs. It had been watching him for weeks, hiding just out of sight. Mark lunged for the light switch, but it was too late. The creature was already at his side. His screams never left the room. 3. The baby monitor. New parents Emma and David were exhausted. Their newborn son, Oliver, had trouble sleeping, so they used a baby monitor to keep an eye on him. One night, Emma was half asleep when the monitor crackled to life. "Mommy," a whisper came through. Emma jolted awake. Oliver couldn't talk yet. The voice on the monitor was low, distorted. "He's awake." Emma shook David awake and ran to the nursery. Oliver was fast asleep, but the rocking chair in the corner was swaying. She turned back to the monitor and saw the live feed. A tall, shadowy figure was in the room, standing over the crib. But when she looked up, the room was empty. They moved out the next morning. 4. The breathing under the bed. When Jake moved into his new apartment, he thought he scored a great deal. But at night, he heard something strange, soft breathing coming from under his bed. He told himself it was just his imagination. But every night, it continued. One evening, he decided to prove there was nothing there. He grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and lowered it to the floor. The beam illuminated a face. Pale, wide-eyed, and smiling, the figure stared at him from beneath the bed. Jake screamed and jumped up, but in the time it took to stand, the thing was already behind him. 5. Don't answer the second knock. As a child, Mia's grandmother warned her, if someone knocks twice on your door after midnight, don't answer. The first knock is someone lost. The second is something else. Years later, when Mia was living alone, she heard a knock at 12:15 a.m. She froze. Knock. Her heart pounded. She checked the peephole. No one was there. Knock. Against every instinct, she turned the lock and opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty. But as she started to close the door, something pushed back. Cold fingers curled around the edge. She slammed it shut. The next morning, she found deep scratches on the wood and a whisper etched into it. "See you tomorrow." 6. The last voice message. Sam's best friend, Eric, died in a car accident. The night of the funeral, Sam received a voicemail from Eric's number. It was mostly static. Then, a whisper, "Don't let him in." Chilled to the bone, Sam checked his doors and windows. Everything was locked. At 3:00 a.m., there was a knock. Slow, deliberate. He refused to answer. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message, still from Eric's number. "He's inside." Sam turned around just in time to see a shadow lunge. 7. The wrong funeral. David got lost on his way home and ended up near an old cemetery. The air was thick with fog, and as he drove past, he saw a small gathering of people in black. Something about the funeral felt off. No one was crying. They just stood there, motionless. Curious, David slowed down and rolled down his window. That's when they all turned to look at him at the same time. Their faces were gray, hollow, their eyes, sunken pits. One of them raised a bony hand and pointed at him. David hit the gas and sped away. The next morning, there was a death notice on his doorstep. It had his name on it. 8. The thing in the static. Lisa's old TV had a habit of flickering to static at random times. She assumed it was just a faulty connection until she noticed something moving in the white noise. One night, the static crackled, and a shape began forming on the screen. A figure, its head tilting unnaturally. A whisper drifted from the speakers. Lisa, I see you. The TV shut off by itself. Breathing heavily, she turned around. The figure was now standing in the dark corner of her room. 9. My son is still crying. Claire's 2-year-old son, Adam, had trouble sleeping, so she often checked on him throughout the night. One evening, she heard him crying. She rushed to his room and found him standing in his crib, sobbing. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, hugging him. "I'm here." Then she heard it. Another cry. The exact same cry coming from the closet. She froze, still holding Adam. The closet door creaked open just an inch. Inside, another Adam stared back at her, crying. She slowly turned to the child in her arms. It was smiling. 10. The basement door. Ever since Olivia moved into her new house, she noticed something odd. The basement door was always locked. The landlord warned her never to go down there. One night, she heard knocking. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the basement. She pressed her ear against the door and heard whispering. Faint, desperate. "Please help me." Shaking, she unlocked the door and slowly creaked it open. The basement was empty. Then she felt breath on her neck. A voice, right behind her ear. "You opened the wrong door." 11. The face in the window. Jason lived on the 12th floor of an apartment complex. One night, as he was getting ready for bed, he glanced at his window and saw a face staring at him from the outside. His blood turned to ice. He stood frozen, his mind racing. There's no balcony, no ledge. How was someone there? The figure didn't move. It just grinned. Jason grabbed his phone, heart pounding, and looked back. The face was gone. He sighed in relief until he heard a whisper from inside his apartment. "You looked away." 12. The elevator game. Sarah had always been curious about urban legends. One night, she decided to try the infamous elevator game at an abandoned building. She pressed the buttons in the correct sequence, just as the ritual described. On the 5th floor, the doors opened, and a woman in a red dress stepped in. Sarah knew the rules. Don't talk to her. Don't look at her. But the woman turned toward her and whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." The elevator doors closed. When they reopened, Sarah was somewhere else. A dark, endless hallway stretched before her. The woman was gone. But something else was waiting at the end of the hall. And it started walking toward her. 13. The girl in the corner. Liam always saw things in the dark shadows that didn't belong, shapes that moved when they shouldn't. But he told himself it was just his imagination. One night, as he was lying in bed, he saw a girl standing in the corner of his room. She was facing the wall, her long black hair covering her face. He froze. "Mom," he whispered, even though he knew it wasn't her. The girl twitched. Slowly, she turned her head, just her head all the way around, until her wide, grinning face was staring at him upside down. Liam shut his eyes and pulled the blanket over his face. When he peeked out a few seconds later, she was gone. But his closet door was now open. 14. The whispering doll. Emily found the antique doll at a flea market. It had glassy blue eyes, a cracked porcelain face, and a faded dress. The vendor told her it was over 100 years old. That night, she placed the doll on a shelf in her bedroom and went to sleep. At 3:00 a.m., she woke up to whispering. She sat up, heart pounding. The doll was no longer on the shelf. The whispering continued. It was coming from under her bed. Slowly, trembling, Emily leaned over and looked beneath. The doll was there, grinning. It whispered, "I found you." 15. The room with no door. Daniel had been living in his house for years, but one morning, he noticed something odd. There was a new door in his hallway. A door that hadn't been there before. He tried the knob. Locked. Confused, he asked his wife about it. She frowned. "What door?" Daniel turned back to show her. It was gone. That night, he woke up to soft creaking sounds. He turned his head. His bedroom door was open. And the new door was back. Only this time, it was slightly open. And something was staring at him from the darkness inside. 16. The thing that answered my mom's voice. It was late at night when I heard my mom calling me from the kitchen. "Come here, sweetheart." Her voice sounded off, like it was stretched too thin. I hesitated in bed, feeling uneasy. That's when I heard something else. A whisper. "Don't go." I turned. My mom was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, wide-eyed and pale. "I heard it too," she whispered. From the kitchen, her voice called out again. "Come here, sweetheart." 17. The passenger in the back seat. Jake was driving home late one night when he glanced at his rearview mirror. There was someone sitting in his back seat. His breath caught in his throat. He swerved, nearly crashing, but when he looked again, the seat was empty. Shaking, he kept driving. A mile later, his radio flickered to life, crackling with static. A whisper came through. "Eyes on the road, Jake." Cold sweat dripped down his back. He hadn't told anyone his name. 18. The hands in the keyhole. When I was a kid, I used to sleep with my bedroom door locked. I was always afraid of something coming in at night. One evening, I woke up to a soft scratching sound. I sat up, heart pounding. It was coming from the door. Then, through the tiny keyhole, I saw its small, pale fingers wiggling through, feeling around. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. The fingers withdrew, and something else took their place. A bloodshot eye, staring right at me. Then a raspy voice whispered, "Found you." 19. The silent caller. Every night, at exactly 2:34 a.m., Sarah's phone would ring. The caller ID was always blocked, and the voice on the other end was silent, just the sound of heavy breathing. At first, she thought it was a prank, but the calls continued for weeks. One night, she answered. "Hello," she whispered, heart racing. The breathing stopped. A soft, raspy voice said, "You're not alone." She slammed the phone down and bolted upright in bed. The shadows in her room shifted. The phone rang again. 20. The mirror in the attic. Greg found the old mirror in his attic, hidden under a pile of dusty sheets. It was huge, framed in tarnished silver, the glass warped and cloudy. Curious, he brought it down to his bedroom. As he gazed into it, something strange happened. The reflection didn't quite match his movements. He stood perfectly still, but the reflection slowly began to grin. He froze. The grin widened. Greg tried to turn away, but he couldn't move. His reflection was no longer mimicking him, it was staring at him with dark, hollow eyes. And then the reflection stepped out. 21. The door that won't stay closed. Lara moved into a small cottage at the edge of town. The first night, she noticed something odd. Her bedroom door wouldn't stay closed. She would shut it, and it would swing back open. Thinking it was just the wind, she pushed it shut again and tried to sleep. In the middle of the night, she heard something on the other side, a soft thud, followed by a slow dragging sound. The door creaked open. There was nothing there. But when she turned to leave, something grabbed her ankle from under the bed. 22. The woman in the portrait. When Claire moved into her new house, she found an old portrait hanging in the hallway. It was of a woman dressed in Victorian clothing, her face stern and lifeless. For days, Claire felt like the woman in the portrait was watching her. One night, as she walked past, she saw something odd. The woman's eyes were no longer fixed forward. They were looking directly at her. Frozen with fear, Claire stared at the painting, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then the woman's lips parted, and a voice cold and low whispered, "Get out." Claire didn't wait to hear another word. She fled. 23. The stalker in the hospital. Jake worked the late shift as a janitor at an old hospital. One night, he was cleaning the basement when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, but no one was there. A chill ran down his spine. Thud. Another step. He turned again, this time faster, but still no one. He dismissed it as his imagination and continued working. But then he heard it, laughter. It was coming from the shadows. He rushed up the stairs, only to find the hospital completely empty. Every light was out except for one flickering in the basement. And from the doorway, a face peeked out, a twisted, grinning face with hollow eyes. 24. The babysitter's last call. Samantha was babysitting for a family she didn't know very well. The kids were already asleep, and she settled in to watch TV. Around midnight, the phone rang. "Hello," she answered. A voice on the other end said, "Check the kids." She thought it was a prank call, but something made her uneasy. She hung up and walked upstairs to check the children. They were both still fast asleep. But when she turned to leave the room, the phone rang again. This time, the voice said, "The call is coming from inside the house." Panic surged through her. She ran downstairs to find the door wide open and the children gone. 25. The child who never slept. Tom and Lily were ecstatic when they adopted a little girl, Emma. She was perfect in every way until the first night. Emma refused to sleep. No matter how tired she seemed, she would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling. Lily would check on her every hour, but Emma's eyes were always wide open, never blinking. One night, Lily entered the room and asked softly, "Emma, why aren't you sleeping?" Emma's voice trembled as she whispered, "I'm waiting for them." "Waiting for who?" Emma pointed to the corner of the room. "They're here." Lily turned and saw nothing. But when she looked back, Emma was grinning. The end.